Well,
Cool.
Nick, can you give us a little bit of a historical background on the island of Cyprus and a little bit about this this division that we see now between
Yeah.
Turkey and Greece?
Definitely. So Cyprus, I think the first thing to say, and this might be in itself a bit of a surprising statement for many people watching and listening to this. Cyprus is a little island in the Middle East, or however you want to refer to it. It's in the Near East. It's in the Levant. As I said, where my family's from is 70 miles off the coast of Syria and Lebanon. And the reason why I say that's surprising is because now, ideologically and structurally, Cyprus is in the EU and it's seen as a European space, seen as a European city, European island. But that in itself is a legacy of whiteness and the colonial construction of whiteness, because Greeks have to be white in order to be the sort of basis of Western civilization.
Would you call yourself a person of color?
So I wouldn't, because for me, that's about how you're responded to structurally by institutions. And the fact is that because my surname's Greek, and so it gets normalized to Greekness, I get treated as a white person. And so even though in some contexts, like with Kurdish friends, with Syrian friends, we know that we're from the same region, we share a lot. I wouldn't claim that because it's just my experience of these institutions is just objectively different, and I think it would be insulting to say it. The irony is, someone can come from exactly the same place that my family's from, and they be Kerem Matheou rather than Nik Matheou, and they're very definitely racialized as non-white. They could look exactly the same or more white passing, but because they get put under Middle Eastern Muslim category, it's just different. But I would say that I'm Middle Eastern heritage, and I think that's an important thing to assert. And the history just shows it. Going far back, Cyprus was part of the Islamic Caliphate. It was taken by Crusaders during the Crusades, by Western Crusaders, and was a colony of Venice, and then was conquered by the Ottomans. So it's part of it's typical of the entire region's experience up until into modernity. Fast forwarding up to 1878, then it becomes part of the British Empire during this conflict between what they call the sick man of Europe. So when the Ottoman Empire is being divided up and is being predated upon by all the Western imperial powers. And basically what happens is in the late 1870s is that the Russian Empire executes a very successful war against the Ottomans and has a very favorable treaty that then the British force them to renegotiate. And as part of that, what happens is that the Ottomans lease Cyprus to the British. So from 1878 up until 1914 and the First World War, Cyprus is in this weird space where it's administered by the British, but there's an extra tax that's collected by the British that they then give to the Ottoman Sultan. So it's in this funny sort of mixed, like a double colony, essentially, of both the Ottomans and of the British Empire. But then in the context of the First World War, it gets declared a crown colony. And from then up until 1960, it's an official crown colony. And still today, as was referenced earlier, 3% of the entire territory of Cyprus is sovereign British territory. So it's officially, legally crown territory. And really, the funny thing is that in the early part of its history as a British colony, Cyprus wasn't all that important. It was a bit of a backwater. It was useful for the British to have, but it wasn't the home of the Middle Eastern policy.
Was it useful? I'm sorry. Was it useful because of its location as far as bases? Because I know there's two bases kind of on both sides of the island.
Yes. So there's a base.
Right?
There's a base in Akrotiri in the eastern side, facing towards Syria, and then there's another base in the south, facing to the Western Mediterranean.
And they're both ports, right? Are they both?
They're both ports, and they're pretty large areas. And they're also the key thing is their aircraft carriers. That's what Churchill called Cyprus, the unsinkable aircraft carrier.
Well, I learned that with learning about U.S. empire and how it stretches out as well, and so many islands like Bikini Atoll and Puerto Rico, like we don't really think about why there's all these island bases. So, and I think definitely there's probably a lot of people in the UK that when you think about the United Kingdom, you think about that just landmass. You don't think about still some of the bases that they have strategically in other parts of the world. And I did find that interesting that both those bases were on opposite sides of the
yeah, exactly. To be able to project power in both directions.
So there's no mineral resources that they're trying to pull. There's no oil. There's no.
No, it was about having a strategic area. Sorry, Stefan.
But there is a dispute now about oil in the Mediterranean between Cyprus and Turkey.
Yeah, so not actually. Well, they're drilling for oil to sea, but hydrocarbons in particular. So there've been hydrocarbons that have been found in the exclusive economic zones, as they call them, between Cyprus and Israel. So there's a lot of power politics taking place now, where the Turkish state is trying to assert the rights of the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus to take control over of some of these hydrocarbons. And we saw like that's now militarized drilling. So that's much more typical colonialism as we think, or imperialism as we think of it, like going for resources. Say, for example, in the same week that northern Syria was invaded by the Turkish state in 2019, they entirely surrounded the island of Cyprus with Turkish naval ships that were accompanying drilling ships going into the Mediterranean.
I mean, a strange thing happened with the Afrin invasion, right? That the leader of whatever you call the regime in northern Cyprus actually criticized the invasion.
Yeah, so that was the older leader who sadly isn't there anymore. He was called Mustafa Akinci, and he's a leftist. He's a leftist, and he had been making the most recent positive strides with a leftist president in the south called Christofias, and they had been really pushing, and so he criticized it in as much as he could, but yeah, since 2020 they've had another guy called Ersin Tatar, who is really just Erdogan's man. But this is fast forwarding a little bit. I think the interesting
Sorry about that. Sorry for the digression.
No, not at all. But it's just to underline that earlier on, Cyprus was a little bit of a colonial backwater, that Egypt was the most important place. They took Cyprus because it protected Egypt, and it was useful for sort of in a secondary sense, but it wasn't the heart of the colonial policy. It was really after the Second World War that you had Cyprus really becoming this crucial base, first for British imperialism and then actually for NATO imperialism. And it's the US in the 60s that's really making sure that the British bases stay there because they want to have a permanent NATO base there. And you get statements from that much celebrated, for some good reasons, but sort of slightly whitewashed post-war Labour government, where they say there is no chance of Cypriot independence at any point, because suddenly it's become geopolitically really crucial to keep the island, and obviously that only increased the anti-colonial struggle then, because they said there was.
Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out. You can catch the live stream of This Is Revolution every Tuesday through Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time and Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific Time. This is Revolution.